I think up to now, we've been in a really interesting place where if we talk about authentication, I've come from being an expert in password authentication and adding multi-factors onto that. And you've come from the PKI world where everything has been phishing resistant and high assurance, for 25 years, and has been very robust and very successful, but just harder to implement and roll out. And we sort of met somewhere in the middle with the best of both of these worlds with Passkeys. Do you think Passkeys will continue to roll out and get greater adoption? How do you see the landscape evolving? Do you think there's other things that we need to consider apart from just putting all our hopes or thinking of Passkeys as a solution to everything?
I think cybersecurity is a very broad area. And one thing I think I've learned over the last 20 plus years is that there's no one size fits all. If you are, like some of our customers, protecting military secrets compared to somebody who's protecting a list of people who've taken out library books, the level of security you need, the level of effort you're prepared to put in to get there is very, very different. But there's definitely a pattern where more and more services are going online, they're becoming digital. The ability to break into them, as we talked about with the advent of AI, is becoming easier. So cybercrime is becoming de-skilled. And a lot of that comes down to how do I actually make sure the right person is getting into that system? So yes, I think phishing-resistant authentication, you can see that in some of the legislation in NIST in the US, in NIST2 in Europe. It's starting to push people towards phishing-resistant authentication. There's no doubt about that. But there are different types of phishing-resistant authentication. There's PKI, there's FIDO Passkeys. There may be another one in 5 years, 10 years' time. They tend to boil down to something being based in cryptography. So we start to look at probably two angles on this. I think we see the people at the very top end of security, the governments, the military, the intelligence agencies, using PKI, but it doesn't necessarily fit everywhere. So how do I look for something else? It's not easy for me to hold my smart card to the back of my smartphone, for example, but I could hold a FIDO passkey there. So how do I manage those and deploy them at scale in compliance with all the standards? We're also starting to see people who've been using one-time passwords for a long time now. This has been the standard way organizations use multi-factor authentication. But we're starting to see hacks against those. They're not counted as being phishing resistant anymore. But those people don't necessarily need to comply with every single letter of a particular security policy that's been issued. They're more concerned about how do I deploy them and make that simple in my organization, because I don't want to invest as much in security as somebody protecting military helicopter plans. So I think it depends where you are on that particular security spectrum and how much you need to invest in it is what I'm seeing. The other piece, I think, is it's not just about the credential itself. So if I've got a phishing-resistant credential, if I were a hacker, I probably wouldn't go after that credential. It would be too difficult for me. So we're starting to see people now look at how do I attack around the edges of the credential? How do I look at the onboarding process? How do I look at account recovery? Classic example, I can have as many secure credentials out there as I want, but if my recovery mechanism is my email, and my email is protected by a password, hackers go, fantastic, I'm going to go after your email and recover all your credentials. So there is no one size fits all, but the general move overall is towards more systems needing stronger phishing resistant credentials, and organizations, depending on where they are on the security spectrum, looking at what type do I need and how do I deploy them.
I think absolutely. I think we've been focusing on solving so many problems with things like passkeys, and the world's moving on again. Two things that come to mind are shorter certificates only being issued with 40 or 50 days lifetime, and that means those now need to be managed. It's not practical to manage those manually for things like non-human identity, machine to machine, and at the same time, this big growth in agentic AI and and people are moving rapidly ahead with that, and not really thinking about the security implementation and the implications of having all these agents talking to these MCP servers and potentially talking to each other as well. And that looks like, for me, the year 2026 is going to be a lot about non-human identity as well.
So you mentioned briefly there agentic AI. That I assume is when an AI agent is performing operations on my behalf or on behalf of another system. Do they need identities? Do they need credentials? Do we know what those credentials will be?
Absolutely. So if you think, and this is the dream. I'm not sure what the reality is, but perhaps you have some agents acting on your behalf, and they'll do some shopping for you. They'll perhaps be watching all the airlines for a discounted airfare. They need to log in on your behalf, look for the best prices and book that ticket. And perhaps have some kind of payment information on file. So they're going to be looking at multiple different services and perhaps coordinating amongst each other, the payment provider, the airline, etc. But at some point, you're going to want control over that. You're going to want to say, I no longer trust that agent, and I want to make sure that without locking myself out of my bank account, I need to revoke all the access and remove all the authentication tokens and things that agent may have had. So I'm seeing an interesting kind of convergence between the high-end non-human identity and what looks like very commercial and user-orientated agentic AI. And those two fields coming together is really interesting as to how that will play out.
So probably what that's implying then is the worlds of person identity management and non-human identity management, which have traditionally been quite separate, are probably going to have to merge together. Because as a person, I need to give control to that particular agentic AI operating on my behalf.
Agreed. And I think we're entering a world where we'll have all these credentials to all these identities, and we'll need some kind of tool to help us sort of think. Up to now, we've always recommended using a password manager to look after your passwords, and we know that reusing a password across multiple sites is a bad idea, because if it gets breached in one place, people will try that password against another site, and at the same time, we know the only reasonably secure password is one that is long and random. And that leads you very quickly to requiring and needing a password manager. So I see password managers evolving and becoming credential managers, things that look after your passkeys, things that look after your secrets, your API keys, but also potentially some kind of credential manager getting more actively involved, and you give it overall permission to say, allow these agents to act on my behalf, give them some tokens or some kind of credentials that they can use for a certain amount of time, and then come back to me periodically, once a day or once a week, and I will carry on giving you permission to act on my behalf.
I think that's a really important point, which is something we've learned from the world of person identity management, is the importance of policy. There's no point me having a credential that says I'm James if I'm not James. It's absolutely valueless. So, and that could be a PKI certificate on a smart card, could be a FIDO passkey, could be the securest cryptography in the world. Doesn't matter if I'm not the person who should actually have it. So that's why a lot of the time we've spent is helping organizations deploy solutions that give them that policy control. How do you make sure the right person has the right credential? And you can prove that if you're audited. So it looks like that is going to be applicable to people, machines, and AI as well.
Agreed. It's knowing you have that capability, or you would like your users, your employees, to log into that website with a passkey and not a password. Now, that website doesn't mind which way you authenticate, but your company policy absolutely says you need a certain level of assurance. And one of the ways I think that kind of policy will get enforced is some kind of credential management tool, but written and implemented from the viewpoint of an enterprise and not as a consumer. It's a really interesting kind of emerging field for me.
Okay. So in summary, more things need protecting, more management.
Yes, and I think of it instead of trying to think of every single credential has to be this high assurance credential with complex onboarding and recovery processes, that perhaps we will wrap some of these credentials in stronger credentials. So those credentials might be good enough, and then you'll manage those, you'll wrap those with a properly strong credential, and perhaps a little bit of a move away from trying to federate everything, where you have the nice control and the central place to do policy, but you also have all your eggs in one basket. So I think there'll be an interesting mix, and there'll be maybe a little bit of divergence away from federation to credential management, which might be cheaper, it might be more flexible, it might give you more control over your data, and things like data sovereignty is also something that's really interesting that's been emerging in the last year for political reasons.
Big trend in Europe.
Yeah. So it's certainly going to be an interesting year, and we haven't even talked about things like post-quantum, for instance. So another really interesting thing that's as CTO, that's right on the top of my radar.
And the number one item that's our US government customers are looking at the moment.
Absolutely.